Hello and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Helga is the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's August 7th, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger and I will be your host today. You can send us your questions and comments via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them on the chat page. Now, Helga, most of the world has been on edge since the assassinations by Israel a little more than a week ago, a senior figure from Hezbollah, Fuad Shukar, and Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, the latter taking place in Tehran. There's a legitimate fear that a full-scale regional war is imminent, and the U.S. has been sending in air and sea forces, supposedly as a defensive measure to protect Israel in case there's an attack from Iran. And representatives of the war party in the United States have been calling for a strike against Iran. What can you tell us about where things stand now? And I have a question on this from Dominic from Thailand, who asks if there's a possibility that an all-out war could be avoided, possibly through action by the UN Security Council or the UN General Assembly.
Well, one would hope so. I think we are absolutely on the edge of the apocalypse on two fronts. One is naturally the Middle East, and the other one is the escalation of the situation in Ukraine. And I think it does require an extraordinary mobilization of many people and many forces around the world to shift the situation, because, one has the feeling that the NATO-related governments are on an autopilot, and for example, the way, if you look at the media, how they are portraying this whole situation, it is unbelievable. I mean, here was clearly Netanyahu in the United States addressing both houses of the Congress. He got 58 ovations, standing ovations in part, to basically a warmongering speech which had no point in diplomacy. Then he goes back and immediately a few days later there are these two open assassinations from Israel versus Shukr in Lebanon and Haniyeh in Iran, in Tehran, on basically the day after the inauguration of the new president. Now the press, when they are covering now that, they don't mention that the assassinations are what triggered the escalation. If you listen to the German media, for example, they report about the pending aggressive act by Iran, which naturally must be met with clear resistance. They don't say that whatever Iran may or may not do is the reaction to the assassination of two very crucial personalities. Haniyeh was the main negotiator from the side of Hamas. He mainly lived not inside Gaza. He lived in, I think, Qatar, or basically he was the chief negotiator for both the release of the hostages and also a possible ceasefire. Now, if you assassinate that person, the counterpart in the negotiations with Israel, the message is crystally clear. That deal is off, because if you shoot or if you kill the counterpart in such a negotiation, you don't want the deal. So, this is very clear. Also, it should be noted that the new president of Iran is clearly, he won the election with the clear signal to the West that he is, a moderate, that he wants to negotiate, that he wants to improve the relationship with the West. And, when you do that in a clear violation of the territorial integrity of Iran, what is the signal? You don't want that policy of Iran to be one of negotiation with the West. So, it's all upside down. And I think, given the fact that there is so much open distortion and open lying going on, you cannot really believe anything which is being said officially. And I think we are sitting on the absolute verge of the abyss. that is not only the case in respect to Iran, but also in respect to Ukraine, but maybe we come to that a little bit later. I think we need to have a mobilization of the population. We have several initiatives. One is, that I called for this Council of Reason, so that wise people from all countries, or at least many, many countries, would step forward and make their voice heard, that this present course leads to a potential catastrophe. And then we are also supporting an initiative by Chandra Mustafa from Malaysia, who has formulated this initiative based on Resolution 377, which basically says that if the UN Security Council is not functioning, and it has not been functioning due to the vetoes mainly of the United States in the recent period, that there is a mechanism by which you can shift the whole discussion into the UN General Assembly on the situation in the Middle East, Gaza in particular, but now obviously the whole thing is widening. So if there is no more recourse, then all the governments represented in the United Nations have to have their voice heard, because if it comes to a general war, it affects everybody. So it's not the decision of a few people behind closed doors, but it is a question of the world public. So I can only ask you, you should definitely get active with us, with the Schiller Institute, with the International Peace Coalition, and because we need a shift in the situation as urgently as the air to breathe.
This is a question from a blogger in the US, which covers a little bit of what you were just discussing. But he writes, the killing of Haniya makes it clear that Netanyahu has no intention to negotiate a ceasefire to free the hostages. Everyone in the world can see that. Why do Blinken and Austin, referring to the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, who do Blinken and Austin think they're fooling when they say they're calling on Netanyahu to negotiate a ceasefire?
Well, I'm not privy to the inside of the mind of these people, but I can only say that, we have reached a point where, those people who are thinking and who are following world affairs with a, open mind and attention, you cannot trust anymore what the politicians are saying. And I think this is reaching a very dangerous condition. Because if you have to assume that what is being said has a different purpose, all trust is gone, and trust is the most important in international relations. And I think that shows you why we need a different approach. And again, the Council of Reason has been the idea I came up with. And if other people have other ideas, they are welcomed. But we need a change in the course of policy urgently.
Okay, we're talking with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. And you can send us your questions via email at questions@schillerinstitute.org. Now, here's a question from Ali. He asks, why do you think former Russian Defense Minister Shoigu went to Tehran? Can you see a possibility that Russia may get involved if war breaks out?
Well, I think the fact that the US, I think the commander of the Central Command is right now in Israel, and the Russian top military person Shoigu is in Tehran, shows you that we are not just talking about a regional conflict, but we are talking potentially about a world conflict. I think, and this has been clear for a very long time, that once there is a war involving Iran, all bets are off, because I cannot imagine that that Russia and also China would sit by idly and see one of their key allies, Iran, being attacked in a larger war, and potentially even where if things escalate, it would involve the use of nuclear weapons. So I think we are really looking at the I think this is a signal. In my view, obviously Shoigu is coordinating things with his Iranian counterparts, but I think it's also a very clear signal by Russia to the world, that there is an end to, crossing red lines without interruption. For example, there was this past Sunday a very important interview by the Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov in Russia, in the main Russia TV, where the first question he was asked was, by the interviewer, how close are we to the apocalypse? And he, in a very stern, very carefully worded way, said, look, the times are over where Russia is making unilateral concessions. And then he made incredible under normal circumstances, a statement saying that the West better calls off any plans for assassination against President Putin and others. Now, I think this is incredible that, if the deputy foreign minister of the, at this point, strongest nuclear power says, the West better calls off any such plans, I mean, that is very, very, very serious. And, what does it refer to? I don't know all the details. One thing it could refer to is an article recently published in the main magazine of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy magazine, which has the title, Should the United States Assassinate President Putin or Not? Or some variation of that. And this is an unbelievable article because it goes through all the different cases where the United States in the past was involved in regime change operations like Mossadegh in 1953, then certain Chile, Allende, and various other examples. And then, unbelievably, it goes through a detailed description of who in the environment, especially the security environment of Putin, could potentially be such a carrier out of such an assassination plan. I mean, that there would be even such an article written, I think it should really alarm anybody that every standard of civilized behavior, of diplomacy, clearly has broken down if something which clearly can only be read as a threat is published in this way. And I would assume that whatever Ryabkov referred to, that is definitely one element of it. And then immediately he continued to refer to Putin's very stern announcement that if it ever comes to the installment of the long-range American missiles in Germany in 2026, that Russia will have symmetric responses, meaning it will have then also long-range missiles stationed in such a way that it targets all the relevant places in Europe and elsewhere. So that is where we are at. And, because this installation of such long-range missiles in Germany is obviously completely unacceptable. It would mean a reversed Cuban Missile Crisis on steroid, because it would put the warning time, given the fact that these weapons could strike deep into the territory of Russia, of just less than 5 minutes, which obviously is, the absolute unacceptable red line of all red lines.
Now, I have a couple of questions for you on the Council of Reason, but since we advertised that the discussion today would bring up as well the meltdown that occurred in the financial markets, I want to take two questions on the economy, and then we'll come back to the question of the organizing process to reverse this. We have from Sean in the United States. He says, as the buildup for war continues, is there a connection between this week's near meltdown of the stock markets and the war danger? I don't believe what the media is saying about it. Was this fake or real? In other words, is it a diversion? And then we have from Thomas, do you think it's possible that given the terrible economic situation in the world, that Russia and China might call for an international conference to address it? I assume he's talking about like the original Bretton Woods conference.
Well, I think, the plunge which occurred on Monday, starting with the Nikkei index in Japan and then spreading to Europe and going even to the United States, and then it was stopped, or rather it rebounded, Bitcoins were involved. So, I think that given the fact that we are sitting on an absolutely untenable derivative bubble, debt bubble, Ellen Brown, the known American economist, she just put out an article by saying that the derivative bubble is not just, it went up from a 2-digit trillion figure in 2000, and now it's at officially anywhere between 2.3 quadrillion or even 3.7 quadrillion. Now that is a time bomb, which, there's no way how you can ever satisfy these contracts, because they are expanding while at the same time you have a collapse of the physical economy. And the only area of the economy, especially in the United States, which is still functioning, is the military-industrial complex, which is why there is this connection that they feel that they cannot stop the war, because if you stop the war, then that part of the economy, which is still productive in quote, will not be relevant anymore. And that's why you have to keep having this war machine going. This is a mechanism which, my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, already, I think it was in 2005, made a very big push for a reconversion of the auto sector in the United States, which was in trouble at that time. And I can only see the only way, even if it sounds very unlikely that this will happen right now under the present constellation of forces, would be to retool that very productive part of the US economy, which is right now in the military, and retool it and go in a massive crash program to rebuild the American economy, which needs urgently repair. The infrastructure is in a mess. The health system is in a mess. There is no fast train system in the United States. Many cities are in terrible condition. And if all of that money and productive capacity money, which is being spent on the military every year, and productive capacity would be retooled to rebuild the United States economy, wouldn't that be better for the American people? Wouldn't it be better for the rest of the world? And then, some arrangement could be found to cooperate with the BRICS. Now, I would hope that China and Russia would call for such a conference. I don't think it's very likely right now, because the messages coming from the West, are really signaling the opposite of cooperation. They're calling, look at the NATO summit recently. They called Russia the direct threat to NATO and China the, most severe systemic threat. I mean, if you want to have cooperation, you're not sending out such messages. I think what the BRICS countries are right now doing, they are preparing to have their own currency. This is obviously not so easy. I mean, if you look at the difficulty it took to create the euro, because if you put in economies into one currency which are on a different development stage, it's very tricky. You have to really be very careful that you create mechanisms of clearing of long-term versus short-term cooperation. You have to balance the different categories. So this is a very difficult process. I mean, obviously, it would be the best if there would be, even in the UN General Assembly, some motion to say we need, given the fact, I mean, this is part of what I proposed with the 10 principles for a new security and development architecture, which are carefully designed to be exactly it doesn't have a lot of concrete details. It has the most essential principles of what would be required to reorganize the entire world system. So I could only urge you, please read the 10 principles I proposed. Look at the proposals for a new security and development architecture, which must include the interest of every single country on the planet, or it will not work. Now, these are lessons from history, from the Peace of Westphalia. And I think, there are several proposals going in a similar direction, one coming from Putin from the 14th of June, where he proposed the Eurasian security architecture, which would be open to NATO countries. Xi Jinping has made various such initiatives, but I think it does require now that there are people in the West really becoming serious, because if you go for military solutions only, the catastrophe of the annihilation of civilization is pre-programmed, and we must get to a different course, that of negotiations and diplomacy, or else we will all not be here very soon.
Now, I don't want to bring the discussion down too much, because I do want to get to the Council of Reason, but we've been inundated in the United States these last days with a hysterical flood of programming about the Democratic Party ticket, the Harris Waltz ticket. And so there's a question that came from Calgary, Canada, that I want to pose to you. This person writes, in watching the US presidential campaign, it appears to me that it is entirely pre-programmed. That is, who will be the candidates and what they say. I heard they no longer produce a campaign platform. What's going on in the world's, quote, greatest democracy, unquote?
Well, I think the greatest democracy of the world is now openly transformed into a plutocracy, because, before this series of events happened, with the assassination attempt against Trump, then a few days later, the NATO summit, then the attempt on Trump, then the whole story around Biden's cognitive abilities. Finally, he was convinced by whoever in the back room to give up his candidacy for the next election. So some people like Trump have said this was a coup. Others, for sure it was arm twisting. That brought up the whole question. In any case, if Biden's condition has been so bad, and it has been bad for a long time, not just in the last days or weeks, the question of who is running the United States, who is making the decisions. Now, Trump was leading in the polls, and then all of a sudden, Kamala Harris, who was pretty not visible much in the last 3.5 years or so, all of a sudden she appears, oh, she is the great winner, the magic figure. Her picture is everywhere on billboards, in advertisements. Now, the answer how this miracle occurred is very simple. 7 billionaires from Silicon Valley put in literally, hundreds, I don't know the exact figure, but an enormous amount of money buying all this advertisement, creating the appearance that Kamala is the shooting star. And, I think it's a lot of hype, and the reality is that money buys the US election. Look what just happened to the Congresswoman Cori Bush. Is it her name, Cori Bush? Anyway, Harley, you will correct me if it's wrong. In any case, this Congresswoman who was, perfectly moderate on many points, but somebody didn't like her stance on the Middle East. So now she has been defeated with enormous amounts of money to her opponent, who is much clearer pro-Israel. And if these things happen, how should the rest of the world, the rest of the world is looking at things much more critically than ever before, believe the story that the greatest democracy is indeed that. So I think, it does require really the average citizens to act as state citizens. And, take the context of the Declaration of Independence serious, when the government is not doing its job, the people have the right and the duty to look for a replacement, which at this point is obviously very difficult given the complications, to put it mildly.
And you're right, it is Cori Bush who was defeated in the second case of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee pouring in millions of dollars to her opponent. Okay, let's get to the Council of Reason. There are a couple of questions that I think are important. From Sibylla, asks simply, the Council of Reason is a good idea, but who to compose it with? And then we have from Takis in Greece, who writes, referring to the Council of Reason, the idea of creating groups of sages in the countries is excellent. This is what they did in ancient Greece and throughout the history of Greece. The definition of a wise man by Socrates was a wise man is not the man who can solve complex mathematical problems, but the one who can make the right choices in his life. The problem is the global elites are looking for a third world war. The two previous world wars, Europe was the victim. Today we're already in World War III and Europe is the victim again. How shall we face it? So I think these are two questions on the Council of Reason.
Well, it is obviously an effort to test, has humanity produced enough human beings who are capable of pulling mankind back away from the edge of the abyss or not? Now, I can only say, this idea of a Council of Reason, which basically is the concept that each nation has produced extraordinary people, or most of them have, extraordinary people who at one point were in government or had a leading position in the field of science, military, clergy, artists, academics. But it has to be people who have, first of all, no ego, who don't step forward because they think, oh, that's a great idea for them to shine. It's the idea of people, maybe old people, not only old people, but many times older people have no longer this egomania driven effort to be in the limelight. I mean, there are elder statesmen, there are people who have scientific contribution or are true artists, loving truth more than fame. I mean, there are many qualifications, but I think everybody knows that there are such people who are respected because they have, through their life work, demonstrated that, that they have no ulterior motives and no egomania motives. And I'm asking all of you actually to help us to put such a council together. I can tell you, since we started that, which is about maybe 10 days or 2 weeks ago, we already have a couple of people who are obvious candidates and who have agreed that they would be willing to serve in such a position. But we are really still at the beginning of this search. And I would ask all of you, if you know of one or two or whatever number of people who fit this category, please tell us or help us to get in contact with them. Let's enter a dialogue, because I think, to have the main idea would be to open up a window, a platform whereby, a voice of reason reminding people what are the basic values of humanity, why we have reached, obviously, in the history of mankind, a phase where if we just stick to the idea of representing the interest of one nation only, it does not overcome geopolitics. So, if you say, I will make my nation great again, and I don't care about how the others are doing, I don't think that will work, because, latest since the emergence of thermonuclear weapons, where if they ever are deployed, it can almost certainly lead to the annihilation of all life on the planet. We should think about the one humanity first. And I think it was Albert Einstein who said, commenting on the existence of nuclear weapons, that, just the fact that they exist does require a thinking in a new paradigm. And the new paradigm has to be to think the one humanity, how we will live together in 100 years from now, how we can overcome all the supposedly so important conflicts, and really think what is that which unites us as the human species. So if you know any such people, please help us to find them. And I'm actually quite confident that this is an initiative which can work, but it has to work fairly soon, given the extraordinary drama of the strategic picture.
Now, given what you just said, there are two final questions that I'll put together that I think you'll find interesting. One is a direct one. Someone asks, do you have a proposal for European politicians to grow a backbone, madam? So that's a little bit straightforward. But then from another person here, speak about natural law, Helga. You're the only person who mentions it. And I think she's referring to the importance of what you just said about the unique quality of human beings. So why don't you take those 2 points up?
Well, if the European politicians would be puppies, I would feed them a lot of bones. Now, I don't know what you would feed European politicians, because they seem to be pretty, determined to eat rubber instead of anything more sturdy, so their backbone can bend as the wind blows from London or from Washington. I don't know. I think we need to replace them with more, with better people, because I think it's not that all of them are bad. It's just that the very system has made sure that right now you have a very high percentage of politicians in leading positions who are singing the song of NATO. And I think that is not exactly in the interest of all the member states of even the NATO countries, because that's a whole other topic. If you are in a doctrine which, in case of war, does not allow your survival, you may be in the wrong alliance. So, on the question of natural law, I think this is very important to be studied, because I think right now what we see in the West in particular is the effort to replace all traditional values. And what I mean by traditional values, I don't mean traditions like what you wear in folklore or what you cook. I mean classical principles, the principles of great art and great scientific discovery, which represent the traditions of Europe, of Asia, of other continents. And, this is being replaced by arbitrariness, wokeness. You can attack anything, white, old, men, philosophers. I mean, everything is being thrown out of the window. And I think that is, a sign of a collapsing empire. When Germany had the hour zero, so to speak, in 1945, when the horrors of the Nazi regime were just becoming known to the general public, and the cities were lying in rubble, hunger was there, people started to think about what can we do, how can we give ourselves a lawfulness so that this never happens again. And there was a very vivid debate about natural law. There are still writings testifying to this. Unfortunately, that was then pretty quickly wiped out by the occupying powers, who placed this debate with Dewey in the education, and with the Council of Freedom, Congress of Cultural Freedom, and similar ideas. So that debate was quickly eradicated. But throughout European history, for 2,000 years or more, there was the idea that natural law is something which exists in creation, in the physical universe, that there are eternal laws which are above what mankind in an arbitrary way can decide here and then. And you find a similar idea in all other great religions and philosophies, because obviously this is something common to the human species, to think that there is a lawfulness in the universe which has something to do with a correspondence between the human mind and the laws of the universe, and these laws are knowable. So I would really hope that there are thinking people who step forward and start to discuss these ideas again, because we have to cut through the shallowness and arbitrariness of the present non-existing discourse. So I can only invite you. We have this coming Friday a very important meeting of the International Peace Coalition, because it's the anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki, and we decided, given the extreme danger to the world situation, to try to make that an absolute meeting point of all important peace movement elements from all over the world. So you should join it for sure, because that is definitely a place to come forward with hopefully solutions.
Well, that's your personal invitation from Helga to attend the meeting this Friday. She's been the moving force behind the 61 weekly meetings of the International Peace Coalition. So if you now have enough time to make plans for it, join us on this Friday. Helga, any final comments? I think you've been pretty clear.
No, I think, people should really, in a moment in history like this one, you have to call forth whatever is good inside you and make that, the basis of your action. And since I believe that human beings are essentially good by nature, I think the free will to decide to act on the basis of the good is always a choice.
Okay, well, thank you, and we'll see you on Friday.
Yes, till Friday.